Robert Sims sat perfectly still. He had spent 2 years learning how to occupy a room that wanted to break him. The courtroom was packed. Nurses, paramedics, and first responders filled the gallery, holding their breath as the federal judge read the verdict aloud. When it was over, the room didn't erupt. It exhaled. A collective breath held for 2 years was finally released. This entire legal battle started because of 3 letters: CPR. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a crime. Robert Sims had dropped to his knees in a parking lot and saved a stranger's life with his bare hands. He performed chest compressions for 11 straight minutes, and while he was still trying to keep that heart beating, an officer put him in handcuffs. What followed, the arrest, the charges, and the multi-million-dollar lawsuit, is a story about the cost of decency. It's a story about a country still deciding if a black man is allowed to be a hero. This is Accountability TV, and this is the trial of Robert Sims. There is a particular kind of story that never makes the evening news. Not because it isn't important, but because the people with the most to lose are often the ones who control the narrative. This channel exists for those stories. Not rumors, not speculation. We use court records, depositions, and the cold, hard facts that were read aloud in a silent courtroom while the responsible parties had nowhere to look. Today's story begins on an overcast Wednesday morning in a Save Mart parking lot. A man named Jeffrey is walking to his car with 2 bags of groceries when his body simply gives out. He collapses. No hands to break the fall. No warning. What happened in the next 11 minutes is documented on video and confirmed by medical experts. Robert M. Sims dropped to his knees on the cold asphalt and performed continuous CPR on a stranger for 11 unbroken minutes. He counted out loud to hold his rhythm. He didn't stop when his knees began to bleed. He didn't stop when the crowd gathered. He didn't stop until a paramedic took over and told him 4 words.
Watch the head.
You saved his life. 6 minutes later, Robert Sims was in handcuffs. The charge? Tampering with a scene. What followed was a department circling its wagons, a 17-year-old girl who refused to delete her cell phone footage, and a lawsuit that would eventually reach $11 million. But to understand the verdict, you have to understand the man. The police report used the word obstruction. But the truth is, Robert Sims had been a certified lifesaver for 17 years. He had spent a decade teaching others how to do exactly what he did for Jeffrey. He wasn't an obstruction. He was the reason a 3-year-old girl still has a father. And when you understand that, when you see the gap between the hero and the handcuffs, the rest of this story will make a very specific kind of sense. The kind of sense that makes you lean forward. This is what happened next. Stories like this only come to light when people refuse to look away. If you want to see more deep dives into the cases the system tried to bury, subscribe to Accountability TV. Hit the like button to help this story reach more people, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Robert's shoes? Robert M. Sims was a fixture at the Eastside Community Center. For 11 years, every 3rd Saturday, he was in the same room on Garfield Avenue teaching CPR. He didn't do it for a paycheck or for the neighborhood fame. He did it because of a silent drive home 17 years ago. A
What
morning
happened? Is he
spent
okay?
in a distribution
He just
warehouse
fell. Someone
watching a
help!
man die
I don't know what to
because
do.
no one in the crowd knew how to save him. That silence changed him. By Monday, he was enrolled in an EMT course. By 43, he was the man the neighborhood relied on.
It drives our decisions and shapes our
Robert
future.
wasn't just
That's why we're
passing
all here.
through. He was a pillar of the community. He lived in the same house he grew up in, coached youth basketball, and was famous for the best smoked brisket in a 3-block radius. He was the kind of man a neighborhood produces when it decides to invest in its own. His routine was clockwork. Arrive at 8 a.m. Set up the 12 folding chairs in a semicircle. Never rows because rows felt like a lecture. Learned together, saved together. He'd write 3 words on the whiteboard. Why this matters. Then, he'd wait for his students. Melissa at the front desk called him the Saturday Man. Through broken furnaces and leaking roofs, Robert was the one thing the center could count on. Local moms like Lisa Medlock sent their sons to his class multiple times. They already know it, she'd tell him. Robert's response was always the same. Then they'll leave here knowing it better. On March 4th, the Saturday class ended like any other. Robert wiped the whiteboard, stacked the chairs, and locked the room. He waved goodbye to Melissa and climbed into his 12-year-old Chevy Tahoe. He had a simple errand: paper towels. He drove 3 miles to the Save Mart on DeKalb Avenue and parked in the 3rd row. He was inside for less than 8 minutes. He paid at Register 4, stepped through the automatic doors, and began the short walk back to his car. He was 4 steps away when he heard it. There was no shout for help, no warning, just the flat, sickening crack of a body hitting asphalt. It's a sound you never forget. The sound of a person who has lost the ability to catch themselves. Robert didn't stop to think. His grocery bag hit the ground and he was already running. In that moment, he wasn't just a man in a parking lot. He was the Saturday Man, and someone's life was officially in his hands. If Robert Sims was the heart of this story, Officer Dave E. Lamond was the ice. Lamond had been with the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department for 12 years. In that time, he had racked up 11 formal complaints. 6 involved black men. 3 involved documented use of force. Yet his record was stamped with the same phrase every single time. Reviewed, no action taken. In the eyes of the department, he had a distinguished record. In the eyes of the street, he was a man who decided what a scene meant before he even opened his car door. He pulled into the Save Mart parking lot at 11:47 a.m. He didn't rush. He climbed out of his cruiser with the slow, heavy posture of a man who expects the world to adjust to him. Despite the thick, overcast gray sky, he kept his sunglasses on. It was a statement of distance. He stood by his car and took inventory. The scene in front of him wasn't a mystery. A man named Jeffrey was on a gurney. Paramedic Susanna Kenyon was working with focused intensity. Against all odds, Jeffrey had a pulse. He was alive. And standing 3 feet away was Robert Sims. Robert's knees were visible through his torn jeans, scraped raw from 11 minutes on the asphalt. His right palm was smeared with blood where the friction of the compressions had worn through his skin. He was silent. He was still. He was doing what any lifesaver does when the pros arrive. He was watching to make sure the heart he just restarted kept beating. Lamond's gaze swept the lot. He looked past the gurney. He looked past the paramedics. He looked past the crowd of witnesses who were still shaking from what they'd seen. His eyes stopped on Robert. He didn't ask the paramedics for a report. He didn't check on the victim. He didn't look at the indentations in the road grime where Robert had been kneeling, or the dropped grocery bag that told the whole story. He walked straight toward Robert. It was a deliberate, measured walk. The walk of a man who has spent 12 years practicing how to communicate power through a stride. His hand wasn't on his gun, but it was near it. A position, not a reach. He stopped 2 feet from the man with the bleeding knees. He didn't see a hero. He didn't see the blood. He didn't see the life saved. He saw a profile he had already filed away years ago. He stood there in the overcast light, hiding behind his sunglasses, letting a heavy silence hang in the air. Then he spoke 2 words. No greeting, no questions. Step back. It wasn't a request. It was a conclusion. And in that parking lot, everyone watching knew that the emergency wasn't over. It was just beginning. Robert Sims knew how to handle a crisis. For 17 years, he had been the calmest person in the room. In his world, being calm wasn't just a personality trait. It was a life-saving requirement. He brought that same quiet calibration to the 2 feet of space between him and Officer Lamond. "I'm sorry?" Robert asked. "You need to step back from this scene," Lamond replied. His voice was flat, final. "I was performing CPR," Robert explained. He wasn't being confrontational. He was being informational. "He was in full cardiac arrest when I found him. I've had my hands on him for 11 minutes. The paramedics just took over." Lamond didn't blink. "I'm not asking about that. I understand. I'm just providing context for your report. Step back." Robert paused. He looked at Lamond, then took 1 deliberate step backward. He held his hands away from his sides to show there was no threat. "I'm stepped back. I'm not in anyone's way. I'd just like to make sure he's stable before I—" "You don't need to make sure of anything," Lamond snapped. "This is an active scene." Robert tried one last time. "I have my EMT certification and CPR instructor credentials in my wallet. If you need them for the medical record, I'm happy to." Lamond didn't look at the wallet. He didn't care about the credentials. His chin lifted just a fraction. "Turn around," he said. The parking lot went silent. The bystanders stopped moving. The woman with the shopping cart, the man in the Cardinals cap. They all felt the shift. At the edge of the lot, a 17-year-old named Maya held her phone steady. She hadn't stopped recording since Robert started running. "Turn around," Lamond repeated, "and put your hands behind your back." Robert didn't move immediately. Not out of defiance, but for a final look at Jeffrey. He needed to see that the handoff was complete, that his 11 minutes hadn't been wasted. Then he turned back to the officer. "Officer, I want to cooperate. I just need to understand what I'm being charged with." "Tampering with a scene." The words landed like a blow. Robert looked at Lamond with something quieter than anger. It was the look of a man who had spent his life doing the right thing, only to be told the right thing was now a crime. Robert turned around, slowly, with complete control. he placed his hands behind his back. He didn't resist. He didn't make a sound. The handcuffs clicked. From the gurney, paramedic Susanna Kenyon heard that click. She looked at Lamond, then at Robert's hands, at the raw scrape on his palm where he had worked to keep a heart beating. She wanted to speak, but Jeffrey needed her. The ambulance doors closed. As the sirens faded, Robert watched the ambulance leave from the back window of a patrol car. He sat straight. He breathed steady. At the edge of the lot, Maya lowered her phone. She looked at the footage. She didn't delete it. She knew exactly what she had just witnessed. The official incident report was filed at 2:14 p.m. It was a masterpiece of selective editing. Officer Lamond didn't lie outright. He simply curated the facts until the truth was unrecognizable. The report was only 5 sentences long. It claimed a civilian was obstructing the scene and refused instructions to clear the area. The word CPR never appeared. The word cardiac was missing. There was no mention of the 11 minutes Robert spent on the asphalt or the paramedic who told him, "You saved his life." In the eyes of the law, Robert Sims wasn't a hero. He was an obstruction. By 4 p.m., the department's PR machine was in full swing. They released a statement calling the scene chaotic and the arrest routine protocol. They used the word appropriate 4 times. They were building a fortress around Officer Lamond before the sun had even set. Robert was processed, fingerprinted, and released by 3:30 p.m. He sat in the booking room with his raw, uncleaned palm and his EMT certification still in his wallet. He requested one phone call. His attorney, Donald G. Oscar, picked up on the first ring. But while Robert was speaking to his lawyer, the narrative was already being hijacked online. By the next morning, a clipped version of the bystander's video began circulating on Facebook. It didn't show the compressions. It didn't show the bleeding knees. It started exactly when Robert stepped toward Lamond. Stripped of context, the video showed a black man and a white officer in a tense standoff. The comment sections ignited. "We don't have the full story. He was probably in the way. The officer was just doing his job." The post had 4,000 shares by the next morning. Each share pulled the story further away from the man whose heart was still beating because of Robert's hands. Robert sat at his kitchen table and read every single comment. He made himself finish every thread, not because it didn't hurt, but because he needed to see the shape of the lie he was up against. He set his phone down, picked up his coffee, and called his attorney for the second time. "They clipped the video," Robert said. "I know," Donald replied, "but we have the full file. The paramedic is standing with us, and we have the truth." Robert looked at his empty kitchen and nodded. "Then we go to work." Ching B. Phillips was 17 years old. She was at the Save Mart for bread and orange juice when she heard the impact of a body hitting the pavement. She looked up and saw a man sprinting across the lot, dropping to his knees before his momentum even stopped. She didn't think about evidence. She didn't think about a lawsuit. She simply did what her generation does when something real and serious happens. She raised her phone. She started recording at 11:36 a.m. That timestamp would later be forensically verified by experts. It proves that Robert Sims was working to save a life for a full 11 minutes before Officer Lamond's cruiser even pulled to the curb. The footage is undeniable. It captures Robert's transition to compressions, arms locked, body weight engaged, a perfect, grueling rhythm. It captures his voice, steady and unwavering, counting every beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. It captures the moment his arms visibly slowed from exhaustion at minute 9, only for him to find a second wind and push through. And then, at minute 11, it captures the arrival of paramedic Susanna Kenyon. The microphone was only 3 feet away. It recorded the professional handoff. It recorded Susanna finding a pulse. And it recorded those 4 life-changing words. You saved his life. Then the camera pans. It catches Officer Lamond climbing out of his car. Unhurried, sunglasses on. It records the walk, the confrontation, and the click of the handcuffs. When the patrol car pulled away, Ching didn't just go home. She uploaded the full, unedited 41-minute file to 3 different platforms and sent a copy to a local news reporter. By 6 p.m., the video had 200,000 views. By the next morning, it had 6.2 million. It was being shared by members of Congress and featured on national news. The department's chaotic scene narrative was disintegrating in real time. Paramedic Susanna Kenyon didn't know she was being recorded until a colleague sent her the link the next day. She sat in her station break room and watched the whole thing. She watched Robert's bleeding hands. She heard her own voice. And she watched the handcuffs. She closed her laptop and called 2 people, her union rep and Robert's attorney, Donald G. Oscar. By the next morning, she had a signed statement ready. It read, "In 9 years of work, I have never seen a bystander intervention this precise. The patient survived because of Robert Sims. I said it at the scene, and I will say it in any courtroom in the country. The obstruction was gone. The hero was on the record." 23 days after the arrest, the first pretrial hearing began. While the police department spent those weeks spinning a narrative and leaking clipped videos, Robert's attorney, Donald G. Oscar, spent them building. He didn't react. He engineered a trap. Building a case is slow work. It's forensic verification, signed statements, and public record requests. It's the kind of work that doesn't make a sound until the moment it's meant to strike. Robert sat at the defendant's table in a dark suit. In a folder in front of him sat his EMT certification card, the very card Officer Lamond had refused to look at in the parking lot. Robert was calm. He treated the courtroom like his Saturday morning classes. Trust the training, trust the rhythm, and don't let anxiety change your pace. When Donald G. Oscar rose, he didn't start with an argument. He started with documents. He placed Robert's record on the table. Certified EMT for 17 years. Lead CPR instructor for 11 years. Volunteer firefighter at Station 7 for 9 years. Advanced cardiac life support certified. Then he read the medical reality into the record. The victim, Jeffrey, had been in ventricular fibrillation. Without intervention, his chances of survival dropped by 10% every minute. Robert had started compressions within 90 seconds and didn't stop for 11 minutes. Donald then read the paramedic's official report. Intervention appears to have been decisive in survival outcome. The courtroom went dead silent. No one moved. Not the DA, not the officers at the back wall, and certainly not the gallery filled with first responders and nurses who knew exactly what those words meant. Robert looked straight ahead. He didn't look at the DA or the police. He wore the same expression he had when the handcuffs clicked, the calm that is a decision, not an absence. Finally, Donald placed one last document on the record, Officer Lamont's disciplinary file. 11 complaints in 12 years, 6 involving black men, 3 involving force so questionable the department's own internal affairs noted they warranted further monitoring. And yet, for 12 years, the outcome was always the same. No action taken. The hearing lasted only 40 minutes. The judge didn't rule immediately, but the atmosphere had shifted. 9 days later, the district attorney's office quietly filed a notice to dismiss all charges against Robert Sims. Their statement used words like reviewed and public interest, but it was missing one specific word: apology. That same afternoon, Donald G. Oscar filed the federal civil rights lawsuit. The battle for Robert's freedom was over, but the battle for accountability had just begun. The federal complaint was 41 pages of architectural precision. Donald G. Oscar didn't just sue the officer. He sued the department, the county, and the chief of police. He cited the Constitution and the Good Samaritan laws that Officer Lamond had been trained on and deliberately ignored. But the real weight was in the appendix. 7 pages detailing Lamond's 11 prior complaints, 6 involving black men, 0 resulting in discipline. The lawsuit was a spark that lit a national fire. Within 48 hours, the American Heart Association issued a warning. This arrest was a direct threat to life-saving efforts nationwide. Fear of the police was now a barrier to saving lives. Soon, 4,000 doctors signed an open letter calling the arrest medically and ethically indefensible. By the following week, the Department of Justice announced a federal oversight review of the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. For the first time in history, a single officer's actions in a single parking lot had triggered a federal investigation. Officer Lamond was placed on administrative leave. The union, once so loud, went silent. Their distinguished service statement was quietly scrubbed from their website. Then, the world met Jeffrey. Jeffrey was the man Robert saved. He stood at a microphone in June, a man of few words, and said, "My daughter is 3 years old. She has a father because of Robert Sims." The idea that he spent even 1 second in handcuffs is something I will never make sense of. As Jeffrey stepped back, the room didn't just applaud, it resonated. Robert sat in the second row, his eyes fixed on the floor, finally seeing the human face of the life he had fought for. The civil trial lasted 4 days. On the 5th morning, at 9:14 a.m., the jury returned. The forewoman read the compensatory award first, $1.4 million. Then came the punitive award, the punishment meant to send a message that would echo through every police department in the country. She read it in an even, measured voice. $9.7 million. The total? $11.1 million. The courtroom didn't erupt. It exhaled. It was the sound of a collective breath, held for 2 years, finally being released. Robert M. Sims sat in his dark suit and closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Outside, in the October cold, a crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. They weren't shouting. They were holding handmade signs with just 3 letters. CPR. 14 days after the verdict, Officer Dave E. Lamond was fired. The 4-page termination letter was written in the cold language of institutional survival. It cited conduct unbecoming an officer and violation of use of force protocols. But tucked away on page 3 was the real admission. The department confessed that their own failure to address Lamond's 11 prior complaints is what led to the incident in the parking lot. 3 months later, the state attorney general stepped in. Lamond was indicted on charges of unlawful detention and civil rights interference. He avoided prison through a plea deal, but the cost was absolute. He surrendered his law enforcement certification permanently. At 44 years old, Dave Lamond was banned from ever wearing a badge again, in any jurisdiction, for the rest of his life. The Millhaven County Sheriff's Department was placed under a federal consent decree. For the next 3 years, an independent monitor would watch their every move. They were forced to create a new review board, one where civilians held the power and the findings were binding. The days of no action taken were over. But the real change happened in the state capitol. Inspired by the 3,000 letters sent by angry citizens, lawmakers introduced the Bystander Protection and Emergency Response Act. The law was simple. No officer can arrest or threaten a person performing life-saving medical aid. The preamble of the bill contained a sentence that summarized the entire ordeal. No act of courage performed on behalf of a stranger should require the person who performed it to fear the consequences. The bill passed with a staggering majority. On a Monday morning in October, the governor signed it into law. The room was filled with the people who made it possible. Donald G. Oscar was there. So was Susanna Kenyon, the paramedic who refused to stay silent. Ching B. Phillips was there too, now 18 years old, with an application to paramedic school already submitted. And in the back stood Jeffrey, with his 3-year-old daughter sitting on his shoulders. Robert Sims stood in the second row. He didn't speak at the podium. He didn't have to. The law now reflected the same lesson he had taught every third Saturday for 11 years. That the weight of a human life is manageable, and the only thing standing between a tragedy and a miracle is the decision to stay and help. $11.1 million. One career ended. One department overhauled. And a permanent law that ensures if you use your hands to keep a stranger alive, no one can ever put those hands in handcuffs again. 7 months after the new law was signed, Robert M. Sims unlocked the CPR room at the Eastside Community Center. It was 8:03 on a Saturday morning. He did exactly what he had done for over a decade. He unfolded the chairs into a semicircle. He positioned the 6 training mannequins. He walked to the whiteboard and wrote the same 3 words: "Why this matters." He started the coffee because, as the front desk clerk Melissa always said, people learn better when the room smells warm. By 9 o'clock, the room held 14 people, his largest class in 2 years. There was a retired postal worker, a pregnant woman preparing for her first child, and a man whose son was already serving at the local fire station. And in the front row, notebook open and alert, sat Ching B. Phillips. She had been accepted into paramedic school and would start in January. She told Robert she wanted to go in already knowing what her hands were supposed to do. Robert looked at her for a moment and said, "Good." He began the lesson. He talked about the mechanics of the heart. He explained why the instinct to be gentle with an unconscious person is the wrong one. He spoke about the cost of hesitation. But he didn't talk about himself. He didn't mention the $11 million verdict, the viral video, or the federal lawsuit. He didn't have to. Every person in that room had seen the news. They knew the story of the parking lot on DeKalb Avenue. Robert didn't want to be the hero of the story. He wanted to teach them how to be the hero of their own. Lisa Medlock watched from the doorway as Robert moved through the room, adjusting a wrist here and confirming a hand position there. She watched 14 strangers leaning forward, learning how to save a life. Outside, Garfield Avenue was quiet. The oak trees shaded the block, and Robert's old Tahoe was parked at the curb, just like always. The scrape on his palm had long since healed. The certification card was back in his wallet. In the high courts and the halls of government, his name was now attached to a landmark law that protected millions. But in this room, on this Saturday morning, he was just the Saturday man. He knelt beside a mannequin. He placed his hands in the center of the chest, and he showed them exactly how it's done.
Why does this matter? Because CPR saves lives. In cardiac arrest, every second counts. Watch the depth and rate of compressions. 2 inches deep, 100 to 120 per minute.
$11.1 million. A permanent law. And a 3-year-old girl who still has her father. Was it enough? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you believe that a man who saves a stranger's life deserves better than handcuffs, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Robert's story is not the only one. There are more. Every single one of them matters.